It is 4:30. I will call this Germantown School District Policy Committee meeting to order. Item 2, roll call. Higginbotham?
Here.
Brown?
Here.
We also have President Ewert. Thank you for your attendance. Item 3, agenda revisions and approval. I'll entertain a motion.
Make a motion to approve the agenda revisions and approval.
I will second.
Okay, motion by Higginbotham, second by Brown. Any discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No, that carries. Item 4, approve minutes. Sub-item A, approval of the June 24th, 2024 meeting minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the June 24th, 2024 meeting minutes.
I'll second.
All right, motion by Brown, second by Higginbotham. Any discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That carries. Item 5, unfinished business. Item A, discussion and action regarding updates and modifications to policy 5113, open enrollment program, interdistrict. This was tabled last time while we were waiting for some clarifying language.
Yep. The clarifying language was the concern that any change to the policy needed a full resolution from the board. That is only during the window of open enrollment. And currently we are not in that window. So any changes to the policy can take place at committee level and then be brought to the full board for approval per our process of an initial read and then a final read. So we're bringing back the same edits that we are requesting administratively under full-time open enrollment, item A, annual space determinations, and eliminating the language related to guarantee and establishing language of current open enrollment numbers for open enrollment availability purpose. The board does not guarantee open enrollment approvals for non-resident students. An example would be I moved to Germantown with my child. We live here for 2 weeks, establish residency, are enrolled in the school district, and then we move elsewhere, fill out tuition waiver, and automatically, our current language states we're automatically enrolled in the school district for the remainder of our time in Germantown, which then we are not receiving the state aid level funding that resident students are, and we're providing services without looking at the totality of the picture of do we have a change in FTE or in our sections within our schools. So the new language would allow annually the board the authority to approve those students to continue, but also determine based on our staffing report and our total enrollment if there is a determination to eliminate existing open enrollment seats. So it gives the board more flexibility as we think fiscally about serving the taxpayer first before the open enrollment student.
Okay, thank you. Committee, any comments, questions? Motion?
Nope. I'll make a motion to move forward with positive recommendation to the full board to approve the updates and modifications to policy 5113, open enrollment program, interdistrict.
I'll second.
All right, motion by Brown, second by Higginbotham. Any discussion? Mr. Ewert?
Where does this leave anyone currently in that situation?
That would be the determination in January when I come forward with proposed open enrollment seats. Again, it's about the motion, so we look at the totality of our current existing, and the motion language would relate to approving existing seats as a guaranteed position or approve existing seats with the exception of, I'm making this up as I speak, but 5th grade. Let's say we see a big enrollment spike of residential students. So it forces administration to bring forward more data so that you're more informed as a board to determine to stay status quo, approve additional seats, or reduce seats.
So nobody currently in that situation
No,
should be
as
running.
we start on the 3rd,
Panicking.
no one's changed. It doesn't change anyone because you made that motion back in January on to approve all existing seats, which fall under the old language of the policy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. There's no opposed, so that carries. All right, item B, discussion and action regarding proposed new policy 2211, supplementary instructional materials. We also saw this last time.
Yeah, and that was sent back to the administration to talk further, not necessarily about the language in the policy. I believe there was positive comments and feedback, but more specifically to the administrative guidelines that can be changed at any time without board action. And based on our bylaws, that guidelines really support the operationalism, or how to operationalize policy language, whether it's this one or any other policy. So tonight I bring back to you the same policy and language that's outlined in green to add this new supplemental instructional materials policy, and then the teaching and learning department and myself have worked on administrative guidelines on process related to auditing and the expectations of our teaching staff to align to the board approved standards as well as publication when it comes to supplementary materials.
Thank you.
Yep.
Committee? Any comments or questions on this one? I know definitely we were looking for the administrative guidelines just to kind of complete the picture of what this would look like.
I guess the only, and I like that we have a step process to make sure, like at the end of the, the year that we review. But it talks about, as far as, it's only gonna be reviewed initially if the teacher believes that the materials may be in conflict. So we won't really, or teaching and learning, won't go over any of the supplemental materials until the end of the year once it's used, unless there's a question by the teacher.
Yeah, I think the next stage of this, if this is board approved, would be then discussion at each site with principals, grade levels. This might be a topic for professional development day, and then coordinators and department chairs at the secondary level to just look at this. And then the first stage is a self-audit. We don't have the capability right now of a workforce to go in and audit everything. But I think as we go through these curriculum review processes, that allows us to utilize this policy to stay to the scope of what you've approved as a board, and then determine if there's a need to fill gaps that we see within the resources we've selected. This gives us the guidelines versus everyone going in whatever direction they think they need to go.
No, I agree, and I think it's a good process.
Yeah, thank you. It's a big takeover to start to audit, and I think this is the first step in the right direction to make sure we have especially at the elementary level, even at the high school and middle school within departments, have consistency of what the resources we're using, and then the why behind we're using those that align to the standards the board has approved.
Well, I think it helps also when you have a new teacher come in, that now they can look at that list and be, well, this worked, and I'd probably be helpful too to potentially have comments on there, like this was useful, this wasn't, so that somebody just doesn't see it on the list, and they're like, hey, that's great, let's use it again, but it
Exactly.
wasn't helpful, so.
Yep.
Yep.
Any other comments?
Just a quick question, I guess. I'm not sure if it would be covered in this policy or not. We say if the teacher believes that the materials may be in conflict with district criteria. Do we have a policy in place? And I'm sure we do, and I don't know if this affects it or not. If a parent has a concern about supplemental materials, their first follow-up is with the teacher.
Yep.
But does that trigger that part of this policy then? That's a conflict that they should?
Yeah, there's a concern about the material, whether it's content or does this truly align to board approved standards. That'd be through the teacher, principal, and then teaching and learning. This then aids in that process of, we have a review process of, are we going to use this as a district moving forward?
Make sure that if we have something like that
Right.
come up.
Our
we
first
follow
policy
this
we look at is through our curriculum development policy that we made some edits in the last year or two that lays out the review process and expectations of what's been board adopted is what we're teaching. If there's content or an activity or whatever it might be that's in conflict with that, that triggers then that who are we talking to about what, but this then supports that from a supplementary standpoint if it's not from an AP textbook or Wonders or Bridges or whatever the curriculum is that's been adopted.
Got it.
And the language in the administrative guidelines is pretty strong, that supplementary materials must align with board-approved standards. And before use, teachers must ensure the materials are directly related to the course of study. So it's pretty strong. Obviously, to your point, we need to make them aware. An in-service day is a perfect day to do that, to make sure that they understand what is expected.
Well, and then to that point then, to say if a parent does come forward with an issue, that it doesn't just stay with the teachers, that no, it's fine, that it does automatically in the training, that it goes up to the next level. It
Yep,
doesn't
it's
just stay
vetted then,
here and-
yeah.
mhm.
Because
For
even
sure.
though the teacher believes that it must, and it does, if there's an outside concern,
Right, then there's a process for
yep,
that.
that's how we work. Good.
Process. I like that word.
Makes everything easier.
Yeah.
All right, any other
Streamline.
Yeah.
comments or questions? Otherwise, I will entertain a motion on this one.
Make a motion to move forward with a positive recommendation to the full board to approve proposed policy 2211 supplementary instructional materials.
I will second.
All right, motion by Higginbotham, second by Brown. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. There was no opposed, so that carries. That takes us to item 6, new business. A, discussion and action regarding updates and modifications to policy 0155, committees.
The recommendation this evening is to strike language related specifically to Buildings and Grounds Committee, as we work to build a stronger relationship with the village and the village board. We're working to, I know President Ewert has been very engaged with the village board on bringing forward a member of the board to be part of our Buildings and Grounds Committee, as well as a member of our board to be part of their Joint Finance Committee. And we think we're close to securing someone. However, we have language in our policy that excludes members of our community if they are of public officials or public office, which legal and administration don't believe should be excluded. And we're asking tonight to strike that so we can build a relationship between the two boards and have sitting members on each board or within these subcommittees to help engage long-term planning as a community.
All right, thank you. I personally don't have an issue with the suggested change. I also have a couple other recommendations as I read through this. For example, under the board shall have 6 standing committees as follows: Finance Committee. That one says, well, the Finance Committee shall meet monthly prior to regular board meetings. Pretty much mandating in our policy that Finance Committee should have a meeting every month. You look at Personnel Committee, shall meet as often as necessary but not less than once per quarter. Policy Committee shall meet as often as necessary but not less than once per quarter. Negotiations, I think that one was as needed. But for the case of Finance Committee, there may be months where a Finance Committee meeting is not needed. I don't necessarily see the need to mandate that. If it's something like vouchers that need to be approved, vouchers can come directly to the board. If that might be the only thing there, or if there's a conflict and we, for some reason, can't have a Finance Committee. The same thing with Personnel and Policy Committee. Why mandate that they have a meeting once per quarter? If there's no business that demands that there be a Personnel or a Policy Committee meeting, I don't see the need to have one just to meet the policy. So I'd recommend changing them to shall meet as often as necessary. And that would be for Finance, Personnel, and Policy.
Teaching and learning would fall
Oh,
under
and
that
teaching and
same
learning, yeah, that one's
category.
towards the end. Yeah,
Which
same
which
thing.
we routinely, I would
Since
think
most
if
of
I
those
look back in the
meet-
calendar
meet
year,
monthly anyways.
at least 10 months out of the year, they're meeting.
Yeah. Right. So, any thoughts on, do we mandate that they have to meet at least once a quarter, or in the case of Finance, meet monthly? Or is it sufficient to meet as often as necessary?
I could see in a situation where people would argue that if you make it vague, right, then maybe some of these fall off and don't meet. I don't think anyone on the board has interest in that.
Nor does administration.
Yeah, I think we work hard to make sure we're meeting often. Sometimes we might have a meeting that could have waited a month, but to keep in touch with the changes that are going on in the district, we do meet very frequent.
I'd reference our last board meeting in the month of August was 47 minutes. And I credit a lot of that to the 5 or 4 committees that met that month and did the heavy lifting so that at the board level, we're moving more efficiently and effectively.
Right, I'm thinking, from a policy perspective, a lot of our policies come after Neola updates come out. And what if we had a meeting at the end of September and then not again till January? Well, we'd be in violation of our policy because we then didn't have one in the fourth quarter.
The only issue, I guess, would be with that is like you don't make policies for right now. And right now, we have a very involved board that is, you know, wants to stay on top of things, wants to keep things moving, wants to, you know, meet. We all, you know, typically we're all at all the meetings.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you have to keep it so that at some point, if it's not the board that is as involved and wants to be here, that you, I think instead maybe you could just change all of them to quarterly. It doesn't, at
Sure,
least
I can
once
see
per
that.
quarter, then change, then have
At
them
a
all
minimum
at
of
least
quarterly.
quarterly,
yeah.
right, so then you still know, and, cause I think buildings and grounds, I think, was that the one that kind of fell through the cracks? It was, well, it was the going on the visits, but I think that you have to have policies that protect for future boards.
Okay, it's understandable.
And I think our constituents expect a minimum level of involvement. And like Kim said, we don't have a problem with it with this board, but for the longevity of the district. As far as the finance committee, that's the one I keep pondering on. I mean, we do have vouchers every month, and there's not a time that we don't have vouchers.
Correct.
If we don't have.
There was a time earlier this year, maybe the end of last fiscal year, where vouchers didn't happen that month.
We didn't have vouchers,
And
and
we
we just didn't
reviewed
have the meeting.
2 months
Yeah.
worth
I remember that.
at the following meeting.
But that's what I'm saying, we did have vouchers. There were still vouchers.
It's
at that
just the
time.
trickiness for finance in the month of June to July
Yeah.
carryover, especially now that we've moved our board meeting and committee meetings to the first and third Monday versus second and fourth when it comes to year-end closeout.
Yep.
What would be brought to you isn't accurate yet, so that's why there was no finance committee in July.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying, it's kind of different not to have it, but we do have vouchers every month, so.
The finance committee also has language that I guess could be interpreted a couple different ways. It says the finance committee shall meet monthly prior to the regular board meeting. I could interpret that as
I
in
know where you're going
the
with that,
same
'cause I read
day.
that too, going.
I mean, if we have the finance committee week 1 and the board meeting week 3, okay, it is prior to the board meeting,
Yeah.
Right.
but that could also be interpreted as immediately before,
Yeah.
Right,
on the same day.
you get away with taking that
Yeah.
out.
That's fine, we don't want to get too detailed with it, the question
No,
is just.
so,
I would take it as it has to occur sometime before the full board, so the full board can take act on any
Yeah.
financial matters.
sure, so what about changing them to at least finance, personnel, policy, and teaching and learning? Changing them to shall meet as often as necessary, but not less than once per quarter. I think
like
in the,
that.
I think in the case of finance, you'll probably still see finance meet almost every month.
Yeah,
Would-
and that one
I
time that
could
we
guarantee
didn't, it
you, I
wasn't
would,
a problem.
I would be asking that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that would be the expectation of administration too. Tom, could you say that one more time? For finance, personnel,
Policy
policy, and teaching and learning?
and teaching and learning, they will state that the committee shall meet as often as necessary, comma, but not less than once per calendar quarter. So that would really, I think that's already in. That's already in.
That's the policy
Policy, personnel,
and teaching and
and
learning.
teaching and learning, so that would be a change just for finance if we decided to move forward with that.
Mhm.
Any other comments comments or questions?
And then the negotiation committees, it should be, that last line should be, committee will be more than 3 members, not more that 3 members.
Yep.
Yes.
Isn't that what it is? 3 members?
Yeah.
No more than 3 members.
No
Will
negotiating
be
committee will be more
more
than.
than.
Oh, yeah.
3
no,
members.
yeah.
More than,
More.
right.
Will
Yeah.
not be more.
More, yeah, it says
It
will be more that 3.
Yeah.
We'll make that technical change. As far as the buildings and grounds committee strike, I saw you had your hand up, Mr. Ewart. Anything related to that?
As far as when they should meet?
The buildings and grounds committee with the original proposed change, why this is being brought forward.
How about allowing a public official?
Oh, yeah. So, just working through that process with the village and getting them on, Tom, I just wanted to thank you. You caught the language in our policy that would have actually prevented that. Simultaneously, we're looking to add one of our members to the planning commission. And we've been invited to have a seat there. And they are, tonight I'll be going over there after this, and they will be working on, I believe, some village ordinance language or charter, I forget which it is, to allow that to occur as an advisory position. So it looks like we both have a little policy. to
Well,
clean up.
homework to do, right?
Little policy to clean up. We had, so it looks like it's moving in a positive direction, and excited for that.
All right, any other discussion on policy 0155 committees? No, someone wanna take a stab at a motion since we've had some additional discussion beyond the recommendation?
So, motion to move forward with a positive recommendation to the full board to approve the updates and modifications to district policy 0155 committees, including the edits, brought forward in the meeting.
And those are specifically finance committee to meet,
To meet quarterly,
as office as necessary, but no less than once per calendar quarter.
correct, and changing,
And
Under-
doing a technical correction under negotiations committees
correct,
for the committee, will be no more than 3.
it will be more than 3.
Shouldn't that
So
be
just
3 or
changing
more?
that to then, huh?
No more than 3.
No more than 3.
Oh, it says that.
Yeah,
If it goes to 4, then
it's quorum.
full board. Yeah, so it should be no more than 3.
Okay, so we have a motion to move forward with a positive recommendation to the full board to approve the updates and modifications to District Policy 0155 committees, including adding language to Finance Committee, to have that committee meet as often as necessary, but not less than once per quarter, and to correct the language in Negotiations Committee that it will be no more than 3 members.
I will second that.
Okay. So we have the motion by Higginbotham, second by Brown. Any discussion on the motion?
This will go in front of the full board, so we'll probably hear more discussion on the meeting structure, or minimum mandatory meeting structure. I'd like to make sure that conversation happens. I just wanna hear every board member's voice on that.
Certainly. And you might find that the Building and Grounds Chair wants to meet more often, because right now it's not mandated at all.
Yeah.
All right, any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that carries. Any opposed? Sorry, any opposed? No? Okay, that carries. Item B, discussion and action regarding updates and modifications to district policies 0100 through 9800.01. Dr. Ritter.
Yes, we have this evening approximately 19 policies that Neola has made recommendations to myself, and after consultation with them and providing feedback tonight, I'm asking as we go through each of those for the proposed changes or revisions. You'll see some policies are revisions, some are rescinded, and some are combination of putting policies together for reduction of policy when they can fall under one main category. So our first policy this evening is policy 0164V, Volume 1, 1064, Volume 2, meetings, and this is a policy related to board's participation in a virtual setting, and this revision is related to closed session virtual attendance by board members, along with additional information and updates, and this is recommended to ensure consistency with policy. You'll see that there is exception listed in here regarding board members' participation related to the general meeting in a virtual capacity. However, in a closed session portion of a meeting, the recommendation is that you must be in person versus a virtual setting, given the privacy natures of a closed session.
I think that's always been held that way.
It's been our practice.
Yep.
Mhm.
It's just clarity on the language.
Yep. All right, anybody have any comments or questions on this one? Nope, seeing none, we'll move on. Policy 2113, educational goals and expectations. This is a revised policy.
You'll see one sentence revision. This is related to State Statute 11801 sub 2C8 to include reference to Hmong Americans and Asian Americans. Act 266 does not contain specific implementation date. Accordingly, this will need to be incorporated in the curriculum moving forward in 24-25. This revision to our educational goals and expectations is recommended to be compliant with state statute.
Okay. Any comments or questions on this one? Nope. All right, we'll move on. Policy 8640, transportation for field and other district-sponsored trips. This one is being rescinded with language then merged into a revised policy 2340.
Which is the next policy. So this again is one of those I shared a few moments ago about taking our policies and merging them together to have policies fall all into one spot versus having multiple policies that say the same thing. This policy is being rescinded. The content of this policy, as Mr. Barney says, is being moved to 2340, district-sponsored experiences. It's strongly recommended to assure consistency with other policies that we move forward with the rescinding of this and then revise policy 2340.
All right, any discussion on this one?
Ultimately, if you look at 2340, the language from 8640 was just moved into 2340 to put it all in one place where all of our sponsored events and experiences are outlined in one policy versus multiple policies.
Any comments? Seeing none, we will move forward. Policy 3431 and 4431, employee leaves.
Yep, these are the same policy, just different work groups. These policies have been revised to broaden and clarify the instances where leave will be granted for employees subpoenaed to testify in matters related to district employment. These are recommended for more comprehensive policy consistency with current demands. So if we have employees that are subpoenaed into court, which we work with district legal counsel, as that is a last resort, as we want them to be able to do their job, and most employees don't like to be subpoenaed, usually related to concerns from their testifying based on custody battles, things like that that take place, and used as a character reference. This would allow for their leave to not, it would not allow for them to lose pay and lose, their rights as employees.
All right, any comments or questions on this one? Seeing none, we will move forward. Next one would be policy 4162, controlled substances and alcohol policy for employees that transport students, and 8601.
So this, similar to the policy we spoke to a few minutes ago, is being moved, the language from that is being moved over to policy 8601, which is in the operations standpoint, and being renumbered. This puts the policy in the same policy area as other transportation-related policies, and it's easier to locate for reference. There are minor revisions, as you'll see. The adoption of this revision is recommended to ensure that the district's policies match the template system that we use for all operational policies, for updates and future evaluation, and ease of use. Again, eliminating a policy to put it in under one big umbrella to incorporate and cross-reference with other policies as needed.
Committee, any comments on this one?
I think a procedural question. On the other one where we eliminated the policy and added it to the next policy,
Mm-hmm.
that first policy was completely stricken out. This one, still half of it remains. So is there an,
Oh, good question.
is that just the part that carried forward? Because the first part of it was already covered in the policy that's moving to?
Yeah, I think that there's redundancy in the language that wasn't struck out with what we have in the proposed 8601.
And that's why the two, but in this case, you still left the verbiage that we were carrying forward, where the other one we carried forward the verbiage and
Yep.
struck it out. So
Correct.
just to be clear, what was struck out completely because it was redundant.
It was
And
redundant.
the part that was left this time, we left there, but that is the part being folded into the new policy.
Correct, correct.
Yep, all right.
Good question.
All right, any other comments on this one? No? All right, we will move forward. Policy 5200, attendance, revised policy.
Yep, I think this policy comes forward every meeting as the attendance for students changes every year with what is allowed and what is not allowed. This policy has been revised to add additional instances of excused absence as recommended by state law. And you'll see on the third page of the policy related to sounding taps, students in grades 6 through 12 may be excused for the purpose of sounding taps, and in parentheses, during military honors funerals for a deceased veteran. So that is okay to miss school when you have a military relative or family friend for that purpose. We did not accept the language that another option was under severe weather conditions, as we do when we have school that does run, even though there is concern about safety of travel, but it's been deemed safe that parents still can use one of their 10 days to call in their child for absence. However, the language being proposed was that if a parent deemed that weather conditions were not safe, that would not count towards their absences, and everyone's discretion on that is different. So when we as a school district work with local law enforcement, transportation services, and the National Weather Service, and deem it safe for employees and staff, we didn't want to provide that as an option.
Yeah, I agree. I would think if the weather is bad enough, we would not be having school that day.
Correct, correct.
Any comments or questions on this one? Okay, we'll move on. Policy 5430, class rank, a revised policy.
Yeah, districts across the state are revising this policy as the University of Wisconsin System Guaranteed Admission Program is going into effect. Requirements for grade 11 class rank and notification to the top 10% first applies at the end of our incoming school year with guaranteed admission for 25-26. So policy has been changed to determine that language so that students are automatically admitted in the top 10% and 5% into UW system schools, with the exception of Madison, Eau Claire, and La Crosse. We also are working on our tiebreaker system locally at the high school level. As you can understand, in a high-performing school district like ours, the top 10% could be a lot of kids, and we have to have tiebreakers for that UW program admit. More information will be going out from our high school school counselors and administration on that process for families. as we get clarity from the Department of Public Instruction and the UW system moving forward this fall.
All right, thank you.
So as that policy, as that changes and becomes more clear, is this policy going to change, or will that
Nope,
be
this
in
will
the-
stay the same. The administrative guidelines that we're working, as you can see in letter H, the district administrator will establish guidelines, AG 5430, related to breaking ties, related to top 10, 5, and 10 percentile.
Mhm.
Mr. Miziak, myself, and Mr. Smith have been working on that, on how, what are the, beyond grade point average, what are the next layers that we look at? Number of advanced placement courses, number of youth apprenticeships, those type of things,
Mhm.
to lay out, to break ties for the UW system, because there's only a certain finite number that would be eligible for direct admit.
Right.
And that's up to the family then if they want to go to those universities, but this is a new way to build more college applicants in our UW system.
Any comments or questions on this one?
Could be an interesting administrative guideline.
Yeah.
We've got
That
it broken
will,
down right now to 5. I can bring that next policy committee or share it a full board. Maybe Mr. Miziak could do a teaching and learning, just an update at committee on the direct admit program in September and how we break down, tie break down to like 5 tiers.
Something tells me members of the community would have interesting opinions
Yeah.
on what should or should be on that.
We currently have for the Wisconsin technical education and academic scholarships policy language that is similar with a tiered approach, and it's based on grade point average, all the way down to drawing names when you get to like the 5th tier is the current language there. We have not put that in the direct admit administrative guidelines. So I'll have Mr. Miziak share that at a teaching and learning committee in September. The program, what this means, the implications for our students and community, and then how we do tier down to break ties. There's been very little guidance from the state on how to break the tiebreakers, other than you have to rank
Shocker.
5th and 10th percent, yeah.
Well, let's be clear, large cash donations are not.
No, no. We do have ethics policies, so.
All right, any other discussion on policy 5430, class rank?
Just, I guess, just as outlier question, but is there any interest in going to different districts and trying to get that more standard? somewhat,
Yeah.
So that everybody's, students, if they go to a different district, they're sort of on the same page as what's.
Or we have transferring students
Sure.
in
Yeah.
11th grade.
I know Jake has talked directly with other districts in the area, and what they're doing, it looks very similar to what we're going to be proposing or putting in place, which is all subject to change as you live through this the first year and see what the ramifications are once you see who's eligible for direct admit. But yeah, I think there's the pushback from local districts has been to DPI of, give us the guidance. You're telling us what we can't do, but you're not telling us what we can do.
So you
So,
can imagine if a student went heavy on something, thinking it was gonna be
Mhm.
weighted heavily, and then all of a sudden goes to another district, and like, no, we don't even consider that. then,
Right.
That would be pretty detrimental to the student.
Right. and that's where his proposed administrative guideline changes that we've been working with Mr. Smith and Mr. Miziak have talked to surrounding principals and directors of teaching and learning, and what are you doing? So there is some consistency if there's, but we can't account for,
Whole
what they're
state.
doing in
Right.
Gillette or,
Right.
Yeah.
Door County or wherever it
How
might
does-
be.
Well, I get this. This might be a little in the weeds. Do we know how they're taking into account program success? So, district of our size and ability versus a different district, and the top 10% is probably not necessarily a
Graduation
one-to-one match.
applicant or so every school district has a district profile that shows their programming, their average ACT score, their average GPA, and that's part of the admissions process at the collegiate level related to, you can get a 4.0 in one district, but it's not the same as a 4.0 in another, because they take that profile as kind of the gold standard of what's the rigor,
So there is-
what's the programming. So those pieces are
There is
factored
some
in.
check
That's
and
out of our
balance.
control, other than
Yeah.
let's provide high quality, rigorous programming and have successful students
But
in
for
that.
this auto enroll, that's not necessarily the case, right?
Correct.
Okay, then.
All right, any other discussion on 5430, class rank?
Not helpful. not helpful discussion, sorry, thank you.
All right, we'll move on. Policy 5460, graduation requirements, another revised policy.
Yep, this one is revised. We have less to revise in this than most school districts in the state, as personal financial literacy is already a graduation requirement in Germantown, and I believe, Mr. Barney, you probably on the committee when you approved that.
Yeah,
maybe
I think the
6
state
years
is,
ago,
the
or-
state is pretty far behind when it comes to
Yeah,
that.
yeah, and so that was the main emphasis of this policy change, so we don't have much to change, other than we do allow a GED option 2 program, so there's language in here for students who may be on an alternative path that high school did not maybe work for them, but we do offer an alternative path to get their GED option and tested, so language was added here related to our graduation requirements. And we do, based on the overview I shared with you, we already have prior approval. We work through all of the regulations annually to offer that alternative pathway related to state statute and what DPI ensures. We also have in our GED 2 program a financial literacy component that maybe other school districts didn't have previous.
Good to hear.
So I think we're ahead of the curve on all of this work.
All right, any comments, questions, discussion? Seeing none, we will move on. Policy 5505, academic honesty.
So this is a revised policy to incorporate concerns regarding AI technology. I think we've had this in the last three
Yeah,
or four.
I think we'll continue to see this.
Yep, as things change at a exponential rate, I think we'll have this every so often. This policy is updated to include optional language regarding the use of artificial intelligence, such as generative tools, ChatGPT, etc., by students in the completion of their school work. Adoption of this language or similar versions of language that identifies use of AI tools to create a form of academic dishonesty, except when it's authorized. This is strongly recommended. So the language change in here is unless the teacher authorizes, given the course content, that AI can be utilized. It's
So we're not except when we authorize academic dishonesty.
correct.
Yeah.
Or there's a reason you might be in a course where you're utilizing AI for a marketing course, and how do we harness the power of AI to build out a product versus I'm writing a paper or I'm doing a project and ChatGPT just did it for me. So that's the language change in this policy.
I don't have any issues with the proposed language. Like I said, I think we're gonna be seeing this updated on a regular basis as the technology continues to evolve.
Yeah, this is a huge thing at the higher ed level in colleges.
All right. Any comments or questions on this one? Nope. All right, we'll move on. Policy 5610, suspension and expulsion.
Yep. This policy is revised to include optional language for you as the board to express preference for non-exclusionary discipline, and is also updated to cross-reference the policy on discipline for students with disabilities. We already use exclusionary discipline at times with pre-expulsion contracts and things prior to hitting the elevated level of expulsion, when we feel that there's progressive discipline is warranted. However, when expulsion-related statutes and policy are breached, then I would recommend to the full board an expulsion hearing.
Thank you.
Mr. Farron, our retired high school principal, would say during his time when we put the pre-expulsion process in place, he would share that there was probably an 80% success rate for students that were on pre-expulsion contracts not going to full expulsion, because we put in expectations at a heightened level for the student, family, as well as then supports in place.
All right. Any comments or questions from the committee on this one?
Why do we specify the designated administrator finds that the student was suspended unfairly or unjustly towards the bottom? it's in green. So I assume that
Yeah,
designated.
first page.
Yeah, first page, about the third line up. I assume that designated administrator was not in there before, so what do we?
When suspension is issued, it's by a designated administrator, so it's either the assistant principal at that grade level or the principal. It comes directly from them, not from me. All parents have the right to repeal or appeal a suspension within 5 days per board policy. So if there's a suspending officer, that would be the designated administrator.
Okay. Was there confusion before that we had to put that in there? Or?
That's Neola's recommendation, probably because the letter or the actual suspension notice is coming from a designated person, not just from administration. Because the
Gives a
language
clear
in
path.
the appeal process is they have the right to appeal within 5 days with any administrator.
Okay.
Usually it comes to me.
That's what I was wondering, if we're saying here's a clear path, it's gotta be through.
Yep, so then it doesn't generalize the administrator.
Okay.
All right. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, we will move on. Policy 7540.05, assistive technology and services.
Yeah, there's one sentence in here, however, it is a powerful sentence related to assistive technology and services. It's being upgraded to address new technology being used with certain students as a way to communicate with them and monitor their location behavior. An example is Angel Sense, if you've heard of that. If these technologies become more prevalent, similar to AI, Neola anticipates further need to address their usage. At this time, the primary concern is the communication component, particularly as it relates to communication from devices to a parent or other location outside the school. This presents concerns for the student's confidentiality. The policy update reflects the expectation that such functionality will be disabled during school unless expressly provided for in the student's IEP. This is strongly recommended. Angel Sense is one of the examples they share. It's a thing that kids can wear that identifies their location. They can also see from it. Parents or anyone that has the account can watch into a classroom or hear a recording. Obviously, there's confidentiality that is breached with that, so this would eliminate that as an assistive technology needed for students. Ultimately, it's similar to having a camera in the classroom for parents to see what's going on with their child.
So it says unless expressly provided for in the student's IEP.
Mhm.
Because that can conflict obviously with the confidentiality. So are we gonna have strict guidelines as to say
It
what
would
in
be
an
an
IEP?
extreme case that we
Right.
would need outside documentation that this must be
And maybe we should.
assistive
Is
technology.
that gonna be somewhere in there just because, except for provided in the student's IEP? So it's not,
And remember, an IEP has to be agreed upon by the entire team.
right.
So that's where we would confer with our special education legal counsel
Mhm.
before we would allow any language in an IEP that would allow that cross-reference with this policy now.
Sure.
Good question.
I'm assuming right to privacy as in the other students in the classroom.
Correct.
Is what we're discussing,
Yep.
not staff or
Correct.
that particular student wearing it.
Right, as FERPA violation
Yeah.
because of minors in the classroom.
Anything else on this one? Seeing none, we'll move on. Policy 7544, use of social media.
Yeah, this policy is updated to provide additional language to address the this is the language thing, continually evolving environment of social media and potentially dangerous circumstances in which school staff interact with students through social media and related forms of electronic communication. This changes are of option is recommended by Neola. You'll see the one sentence, I believe, related to district employees are prohibited from posting or releasing confidential information about student employees, volunteers, or district operations through social media without appropriate consent. Sorry. Of the parent express written consent from the parents of the student, the affected employee or volunteer, or the district administrator concerning district operations. They cannot identify the student in any way in social media posts, publications, or social media from the district must be approved by the parent in advance. Any posting by the district employee that identifies students must be consistent with policy 1213, 3213, and 4213, as well as 4213 student welfare. We have a passive consent form parents fill out in the online verification process to allow their child's image to
Just
be
gonna ask that.
be put on
Should say no or be
district
say.
Facebook, district website, any district physical publications, anything. So that's part of the annual online verification. So then staff is told who in their class or in their building cannot have their photo put out there or name.
And this goes, I think, a little bit further than just that, not just posting picture, but you can't identify the student, so you can't say Joe Smith.
Yep. So you think about at the high school, we have monthly student of the month. We put their picture on, and we may put their last name or their initials with it, but we don't say Eric Brown or Joe Smith or whoever it might be.
I think, employee handbook covers
Mm-hmm.
personal contact, right?
Yep.
As far as, just might be a little redundant on some of that.
Yep.
Mr. Brown? Nothing?
Got nothing.
Got nothing.
Anybody else? Comments on this one? All right, we'll move on. Policy 8500, food services.
This policy is updated to streamline the dietary accommodations language and reference the appointment of the special dietary accommodations coordinator as required by regulations. Also added is a required grievance procedure related to the disability-related dietary accommodations process. A grievance procedure is required by federal regulation 7 CFR 15B.6. This is strongly recommended. Annually or biannually, DPI audits our policies with anything related to food service, and we have to have the most current legal language in this. As you can see, there's a lot of language added related to special dietary needs. This stems from court cases where students with disabilities or had prescribed special dietary needs, school districts were not accommodating those through their food service program. So it lays out more succinct language on what we must do for modifications, as well as the complaint process if a family or parent feels that their child is not receiving modifications as deemed by their special dietary needs. Because we are federally funded, we need to follow those regulations.
Yeah, a lot of language being added here.
As well as then that language, then, as I said, you'll see in a upcoming, I think it's the next one around food service, there's an annual audit, or around vending machines. There's an annual or biannual audits related to our policies to make sure they're in compliance with federal regulations. So this is mandatory language, as you'll see in the next policy as well.
Seems like we don't have much of a choice if we need to have it there if we want to continue to be in compliance.
Yeah, and this most of the time when these things, you see this much green, that's because there's a impending or decided court case that was out there in another district in this country.
What if the medical recommendation for dietary needs is not in alignment with the federal needs or federal requirements?
So they're saying you need more junk food, or what do you mean?
Yeah, maybe something like that.
Yeah, that's a good question.
I'll look into it.
Yeah,
Just to run with that scenario, current requirement is you have to have so many vegetables,
Mhm.
fruit, and protein. What if someone's allergic to protein?
well, and that would be that you have an option then. I don't know that anyone can be allergic to protein,
I'm-
but I would say lactose
Sure,
intolerant.
perfect.
We need to still provide a lactose-free option and not just say, yep, this is the only thing you can get has cheese on it. Even though it meets the guidelines, we have to provide a secondary food item that still meets the guidelines but is lactose free. That's the easiest one I can think of, or something soy related. As my time as a middle school principal, those were the most common ones that came up, or peanut allergy, those type of things. Versus, nope, today's only choice is the corn dog. You know, that's where that's coming into play here.
All right. Any other comments or questions on this one?
And we are the ones that have to come up with, if we don't have it, we have to.
Correct, and you'll see that they added the updated language on page 3. Jill Seefeld is our new food and nutrition supervisor, and so her contact information is added here. She'd be the one that parents would work through with those special needs, and if they don't feel they're being met, the grievance process, then it comes through me.
All right, thank you. Anything else on this one? No? All right, we'll move on to policy 8540, vending machines.
Vending machines, so there's a non-discrimination statement that's been added here. This policy is updated to include the Department of Agriculture's required non-discrimination statement. This update is made pursuant to an audit in which this requirement was identified by the auditor, which is our related to our 8510 wellness policy. When I say auditor, the first stage of audit was done by Neola to make sure our policies are in compliance. This is a new regulation that's been put forth by the Department of Agriculture to add their language related to non-discrimination statement. As I shared earlier, DPI audits our policies to make sure they're in alignment with the federal guidelines so that we can receive the federal funding related to that. So this adoption of this update is strongly recommended to be in compliance with DPI, the auditor's expectations.
Thank you. Comments or questions on this one? Seems pretty cut and dry. It's required to meet the audit requirements.
We are just front running it, i.e. that if we got audited, it wasn't there, they'd come back to us before pulling federal funding.
Correct, and say,
"Fix
update your
this,
policy.
Give us proof that you fixed it."
Yeah. This way we're not having another meeting to do that.
I'd rather pass the audit in the beginning rather than have a finding I have to go back and address. Any other comments on this one? All right, seeing none, we move on. Policy 8660, transportation by private vehicle for district-sponsored activities or trips.
This policy is updated to provide additional options to better control private transportation for field trips, given that the need to do so continues to increase as we see there's less bus drivers and those type of things. This is highly recommended for added changes.
As I was reading through this, I found what I think is a language problem. Guess I'll get your comments on it. If you're looking on the first page of the policy, the paragraph, the big paragraph, I guess, on the first page, it starts with "a person may be approved for transportation." Give you a second to find that. A person may be approved for transportation of students in a private vehicle if the person is an employee of this board, comma, an approved volunteer, comma, the parent of a student enrolled in this district, comma, the holder of a currently valid license to operate a motor vehicle in the state of Wisconsin, comma, and is at least 18 years of age. The way I read it, with all those commas and then an "and" at the end, I think you have to be an employee, an approved volunteer, and the parent, as well as hold a valid license and be 18 years old. So my recommendation would be have the clarifying items in the beginning where you are an employee, an approved volunteer, or the parent of a student enrolled in this district.
And
Have that be a period, and then continue on that the approved person must hold a valid license to operate a motor vehicle in the state of Wisconsin and be at least 18 years of age. So kind of breaking it apart in two different sentences and clarifying what the first requirement is, that you have to be one of these three categories of people.
And you have to have the other two.
and you have to have the other two. Does that make sense?
Makes sense.
So I guess for proposed language, after approved volunteer, leave the comma and put or the parent of a student enrolled in this district, period. And then the
Approved person
approved
must hold
person,
a valid.
yeah, the
license, yeah.
approved person must be a holder of a current valid license to operate a motor vehicle in the state of Wisconsin.
Comma, and at least 18 years of age, period.
Yeah. Give you a second to read through that, see if that makes sense for you. Everybody good with that recommendation? Okay, if we move down 2 paragraphs to a person shall be permitted to transport students, that paragraph. Only if that person is the holder of automobile, oh, I take that back, it's not that paragraph, it's the next one. Any private vehicle used for the transportation of students must be owned or leased by the approved driver. I guess my problem with this one is my car's in the shop for repair and they give me a loaner. Does that mean that I can't transport any students? Or my car's in the shop and my neighbor says, hey, I have an extra car for the week, feel free to use it. So I was thinking we modify the language slightly to be that you are the authorized user of that vehicle. Whether your neighbor authorized you to use it, the car dealership authorized you to use it, Enterprise Rent-A-Car, because you rented a car, they authorized you to use it.
My only, and I don't know if this is a concern or not, I'll say it out loud. Protection of the people being transported. You use your neighbor's car and you're authorized to do it, you don't know the maintenance record of it. We don't wanna get in the case going, neighbor said I could use that, I didn't know the brakes were bad. So I think that's why that's in there, saying, you're taking personal responsibility of this car, you've maintained it, you think it's safe.
And I can see that point.
I see where you're going with that, so I'm trying to figure out how to work the wording in that, cause we don't want people borrowing somebody else's car to transport, cause you don't know the maintenance history of that.
Yeah, and I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Ritter, I think this would apply if I'm picking up my daughter from practice and maybe also bringing a neighbor kid home.
Who the parents have signed the form to say
Right, so the
Tom
parents
Barney
have
can
authorized
transport.
that I can transport that student.
This then is saying that the vehicle you're operating is either owned or leased by you.
Yeah, in this, and just to be clear, in your scenario, I mean, we're talking about private vehicle use for district-sponsored activities or trips, not just getting kids to and from schools.
Yeah, this is.
I'm picking my student up from a match where they just competed. They were bused there from school. I signed the authorization form saying I'm gonna take my student home with me. And the neighbor kid also has a signature from their parents saying,
They're not being transported under, this would be, the district vans are in use and you volunteered as a parent, cause you have a van
To get kids up to the
to
schools.
take 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, whatever it fits, up to, the girls' softball facilities for
I think-
practice.
I
This is
think
a
we
go-
need to clarify that, cause the policy starts off, the very first sentence is that when the board provides transportation to district-sponsored activities, students are expected to use such transportation for the duration of the activity or trip.
Right,
Unless
unless
the
they sign
authors-
that waiver that we have
Yeah.
parents sign saying, I take full responsibility
That
for it.
breaks,
We're just saying we can't implement private vehicle use to get them where parents are expecting the district to get them to. But if they sign that waiver to say, my kid's coming home with me, that's on them.
yeah, that's what breaks that. Then we're not, they're authorizing that we're no longer responsible. That's why we have that, because then we're not responsible if, as a district, if the parent, they said, please take my kid home with your son or daughter,
Hmm.
and then something happens, that authorization is what breaks our liability.
That'd be between those two parties, the two parents that arrange that. But we're just making clear that we are not gonna bait and switch. There's a reasonable expectation when we as a district transport kids that often, like Russ said, district van is down.
And the
Somebody
band
goes right
teacher
on.
takes our kids to a band event in their own minivan.
Yeah,
Yep, that it's owned or leased by them.
Sure. So is the assumption that this doesn't apply to me taking my child and the neighbor kid home after?
As long as they sign that
competition?
waiver, yeah. 'Cause that's what them signing that waiver is.
Yeah, that
for.
waiver takes away all liability to the district, so you could be driving Kim's car, now that I think about that, or anyone's, because now you assume liability, it's off the district.
That's why we have them sign that.
So would you want to, because like I said, say your car down, or say a parent wants to help out and rent a van, would you, because a rental company has to have their cars up to?
Legally rentals are classified as short-term leases, so
Okay,
it'd be
so
leased
that
to
would
you.
be covered by that.
All right, so leave it as is?
I think you're good, unless you guys think.
And we verify who's up, we have a form that annually employees that are, have to sign off for, transporting students.
It's not just every employee.
No. There's, we have, like, I have the entire administrative team fill out the form, because you never know if, as a principal, all of a sudden the child doesn't have a ride home and you've contacted someone and they're not coming for hours. You know, there's those weird special case scenarios, but there's only, related to coaches and advisors. It's not just anyone can drive a student home. We have a list of those that are authorized to.
All right. Any other comments on 8660? Okay. Move on to 8680.
So
Last one on our list.
Yep, another transportation policy. This is revised to remove reference to transportation using school district-owned buses, so we don't own any. This policy is intended to cover transportation through contracts with a transportation provider. It's strongly recommended to ensure consistency with other pertinent policies, which are included in this update as well. We obviously utilize Go Right Way as our contracted service. However, there are other services we utilize for special case scenarios, specifically related to specialized transportation and special education, or specialized transportation for off-site clinics and or alternative placements. An example is a company we utilize called Hop Skip. It's not Jump Services. It's a shuttle service for students to go to alternative placement schools where it's not financially feasible to add a bus route or a bus for one student. So we do use other contracted services that we have agreements with parents. This helps us encompass all of our contracted services and allows for language to continue in those unique circumstances, which is maybe utilized for less than 5 students in the school district. As well as we don't own any of our own buses, so that language is stricken from the policy as well.
All right. Any comments or questions on this one?
hold on, I'm thinking on something here.
Okay, take your time.
And this is reflecting back on the conversation we just had about private transportation. We say here, the owner or leasing of all privately owned motor vehicles used by the district to transport students shall be written contract. Do we need to have that same clause in there saying that it has to be owned or leased by that person? It can't be
Or company.
borrowed, or
We have that in the previous policy.
the one we just
No.
covered?
This is any private vehicle used for transportation of students must be owned or leased by the appropriate driver.
That's what I'm asking. Does that cover this, so we don't need to put it in this policy also?
No, these are contracted services.
Right, so when we contract with a provider of these services, that's a requirement that it's their vehicles, right?
Correct, correct.
They can't go, you know, our shuttle
Sublease it?
bus is
No,
down,
no,
we're gonna
that's,
go borrow the
they're their
neighbor's.
own, that's what that language is, that
Or
they're,
they subcontract out.
no, they own their owner or leasing of all privately owned motor vehicles used by the district shall be under a written contract. So they have to be an owner or lease a fleet of minivans or
Of that
buses.
van, of that
Correct,
specific.
correct.
Okay, so it's not like they can go out and borrow one when
No,
they're short one?
no,
Okay.
it's either their own fleet or leased fleet.
Okay.
Good?
Yep.
All right. That takes us to the end of our scheduled items of policy 0100 through 9800.01.
The next Neola update for your information is expected in mid-January.
Okay. If anyone wants to bring forward a motion, I am ready for it.
The motion we bring forward, does it have to list all the changes to the policy that we made there? Or can it be just one sweeping?
I would think as discussed.
I saw you writing feverishly.
I would say motion to approve all recommendations, edits, and revisions as discussed for policies 0100 through 9800.01.
I'll second that.
I can't do that
I
legally.
get- But it sounded really good. Updates, revisions, and modifications
Yeah,
as discussed. So I will make a motion to move forward with a positive recommendation to the full board to approve the updates, revisions, and modifications as discussed to district's policies 0100 to 9800.01.
I
Okay.
will second that.
Motion by Higginbotham, second by Brown. Any discussion? I think we had it all already. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. I will take one more motion.
Nah.
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All right, motion adjourned by Higginbotham, second by Brown. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. There was no opposed. That carries. We are adjourned at 5:43.